Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The winds blew cold across the charred earth. Ash fell like snow, coating everything in a thick, gray blanket. Where once there had been lush forests and vibrant towns, now there were only ruins. The dark flames had come, just as the prophecy foretold. They consumed everything in their path: trees, stones, people. Nothing was spared. And with each village that fell, the dread grew. In a small corner of the world, where the flames had yet to reach, a young alchemist named Leah stood before the village elder. Her hands were shaking, but her heart pounded with a fiery resolve. She had spent her whole life learning about fire, its properties, its dangers. But never did she imagine she would have the power to control it. "You've seen the vision, haven't you?" the elder rasped, his voice thick with age. His eyes, milky and clouded, stared past her as if peering into some distant realm. Leah swallowed hard and nodded. I saw it. The flames. But not the dark ones. It was different. Pure. Bright. The elder nodded slowly. "The true fire," he whispered. "The prophecy speaks of it. When the dark flames cover the land, only the sacred fire can extinguish them. And you, child, are the one destined to wield it." Leah's pulse quickened. "But I don't know how." "I've only just, you will learn," the elder interrupted, his gaze now fixed firmly on her. "There is no other choice." That night, Leah packed what little she could carry: a few vials of herbs, a pouch of dried meat, and her alchemy kit. As she made her way to the village gate, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that had been placed on her. She was no warrior, no seasoned adventurer. She was just a girl with a talent for mixing potions and crafting small flames. But the vision, it had been so clear. The sacred fire was calling her. And she had to find it. As she stepped out into the night, leaving the only home she had ever known, she couldn't help but glance back at the village one last time. The dark flames hadn't reached it yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. She turned and walked into the wilderness, the cold wind biting at her face, the weight of the prophecy heavy on her shoulders. The first few days of her journey were uneventful, but exhausting. Leah had never been much of a traveler, and the rough terrain took its toll on her quickly. But she pushed forward, driven by the vision that haunted her dreams every night: the sacred fire, burning bright and pure, calling her name. It was on the fourth day that she encountered them. A group of warriors, hardened by battle and scarred by the flames. They were sitting around a campfire, their faces lit by the flickering light, discussing their next move. Leah approached cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed allies. She couldn't do this alone. "Who goes there?" a voice called out, deep and rough. Leah stepped into the light, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "My name is Leah. I'm seeking the sacred flame." The warriors exchanged glances, and one of them, a tall man with a thick beard and a large sword strapped to his back, stood up. "The sacred flame? You mean the fire that can stop the dark flames?" Leah nodded. "Yes. I've seen it in a vision. I know where it is." The man eyed her skeptically. "A vision, huh? And what makes you think you can find it? You're just a girl." Leah swallowed her pride. I can control fire. I've been trained as an alchemist." At this, the group stirred. The bearded man crossed his arms over his chest. "Fire, huh? Prove it." Leah took a deep breath and closed her eyes, focusing on the warmth inside her. She had practiced this many times before, but never in front of an audience. Slowly, she raised her hand, and a small flame flickered to life in her palm. It danced and flickered, casting a warm glow over her face. The warriors watched in silence, their eyes wide with surprise. After a moment, the bearded man let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. We might just have a chance after all." And so, Leah found herself traveling with the warriors. They were a rough and motley group, but each one had their own strengths. Kale, the bearded man, was their leader, a stoic swordsman with a tragic past. Ithar was their archer, a former hunter with sharp instincts and a quick wit. Sarah was the group's healer, a kind and gentle woman who knew more about ancient lore and magic than anyone Leah had ever met. And then there was Derek, a gruff but loyal warrior who seemed to doubt Leah's abilities at every turn. Their journey was long and dangerous. The dark flames spread quickly, and with each passing day, they grew stronger. The group encountered twisted creatures born from the dark fire's influence, shadow beasts, flame-born monstrosities, and worse. But with each battle, Leah's control over her fire grew. She learned to summon it more quickly, to make it burn hotter, brighter. But with that power came fear. The dark flames whispered to her in the night, tempting her to lose control, to let the fire consume her. There were moments when Leah almost faltered, when the weight of the prophecy felt too great to bear. But Kale was always there, his calm presence steadying her, reminding her of the sacred flame they were seeking. Sarah, too, became a confidant, sharing ancient tales of alchemists who had wielded great power in times long past. As they traveled through the charred lands, they reached the ancient ruins of the Fire Temple, a place said to be the last known resting place of the sacred flame. The temple was crumbling, its walls blackened by the very fire it was meant to protect. As they stepped inside, the air grew heavy with the scent of burning wood and ash, but they were not alone. Dark figures emerged from the shadows, creatures born from the very flames they sought to extinguish. The battle that followed was brutal. Derek was injured, his arm scorched by the dark fire, and Leah was forced to tap into a power she had never used before. In the midst of the fight, she had a vision. A great flame spirit appeared before her, its voice echoing in her mind. "You are the one chosen to bear the sacred flame," it said. "But to do so, you must be willing to sacrifice everything." Leah awoke from the vision, breathless and shaken. She knew now what the prophecy meant. The sacred flame could not be wielded without great cost. But what that cost was, she didn't yet understand. They barely escaped the temple, but the dark flames were growing stronger. With no time to rest, they pressed onward to the final resting place of the sacred flame, a mountain of ancient fire and magic, hidden deep within the charred lands. The journey to the mountain was perilous, filled with treacherous terrain and more dark creatures, but they pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. At the base of the mountain, they were confronted by Zarek, the dark flame's incarnation, a towering entity of black fire, its eyes burning with hatred and destruction. The battle that followed was unlike anything Leah had ever seen. The group fought valiantly, but Zarek was too powerful. One by one, they began to fall. Derek was knocked unconscious, Ithar's arrows were useless against the creature's flame, and Sarah struggled to keep them alive with her healing magic. In the heat of the battle, Kale made the ultimate sacrifice, throwing himself in front of Leah to protect her from a deadly blow. As his body fell to the ground, something inside Leah snapped. The grief, the fear, the anger, it all surged inside her, mixing with the fire that had been growing within her since the beginning of their journey. she let out a scream, and the sacred flame answered her call. Her body erupted in a blaze of golden light, the fire burning so hot and pure that it cut through the darkness like a knife. She faced Zarek head-on, her power surging, her heart pounding with the weight of the prophecy. The flames around them swirled in a deadly dance, but Leah was no longer afraid. She was the flame. She was the light. With a final burst of energy, Leah unleashed the sacred flame's full power, vanquishing Zarek in a blinding explosion of light and heat. The dark flames receded, the land began to heal, and the skies cleared. Leah stood alone on the battlefield, the weight of her victory heavy on her shoulders. Kale was gone, but his sacrifice had not been in vain. The prophecy had been fulfilled. The sacred flame had defeated the darkness. But Leah knew her journey was far from over. She was now the guardian of the sacred flame, and as long as there was darkness in the world, she would be there to fight it. The group gathered around her, their faces solemn but grateful. Sarah placed a hand on Leah's shoulder, offering her a small, sad smile. "The world owes you a debt, Leah," she said softly. Leah nodded, though her heart was heavy with loss. "It's not over," she whispered. "There will always be darkness. But now, we have the flame to fight it." Together, they left the mountain behind, the sacred flame burning brightly within Leah's heart, a beacon of hope for the future. Leah walked away from the mountain, her steps heavy with the weight of what had transpired. She could still feel the warmth of the sacred flame deep within her, but it did little to ease the ache in her chest. The land was quiet now, the dark flames having receded, but the air still felt thick, almost suffocating. The silence after the battle was deafening, and all she could think about was Kale's final moments. Sarah stayed close beside her, offering support in her quiet, compassionate way. Leah hadn't spoken much since the battle's end. There was too much to process. Kale's sacrifice haunted her every thought, the way his body had crumpled to the ground as he shielded her from Zarek's final blow. She hadn't asked him to do it, but deep down, she knew Kale had always been ready to sacrifice himself for the greater good. Still, it didn't make the loss any easier to bear. Ithar and Derak led the way back, their eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful even in this moment of hard-earned peace. Despite their survival, the victory felt hollow. The journey had taken more from them than any of them had anticipated. Derak limped slightly, a reminder of his injury in the temple, though he bore it without complaint. Ithar had a permanent scowl on his face, his grief for Kale hidden beneath layers of stoicism. Leah's mind wandered back to the prophecy. It had been fulfilled, hadn't it? The dark flames had been vanquished, and the land was beginning to heal. But the victory had come at such a great cost. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far greater, something she wasn't yet prepared for. They passed through a small village, one of the few that had been spared the dark flames. The villagers stared as they walked through, their eyes wide with curiosity and hope. Word had spread quickly. Leah could see it in their faces. They knew of the battle, of the sacred flame. She could feel their hope, fragile yet burning brightly, just like the flame inside her. It was a strange feeling, knowing that so many people were looking to her now. She had never asked for this responsibility, but it had been thrust upon her nonetheless. Sarah caught Leah's eye and gave her a small nod, as if to say, "You're doing fine." Leah appreciated the silent support. Without Sarah, she wasn't sure how she would have made it this far. Sarah had a way of keeping them grounded, especially when everything seemed to spiral out of control. By the time they reached the outskirts of the village, dusk had settled over the landscape, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. They made camp for the night in a clearing just outside the woods, where the trees provided a bit of cover and the stars shone brightly overhead. For the first time in what felt like weeks, there was no threat looming over them, no immediate danger. But even in the calm, Leah felt restless. The fire crackled softly as they sat around it, the flames casting long shadows across their faces. No one spoke for a long time. Derek stared into the flames, his expression unreadable, while Ithar busied himself with his bow, tightening the strings and fidgeting with the arrows. Sarah sat beside Leah, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes closed as if in meditation. Finally, it was Ithar who broke the silence. "What now?" His voice was low, almost cautious, as if he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Leah didn't look up from the fire. She had been asking herself the same question since the battle ended. What now? The prophecy was done, the dark flames extinguished. But the world felt far from safe, and she knew there was still more ahead, more that she couldn't yet foresee. "We go on," Sarah said softly, opening her eyes. "The world isn't healed overnight. There are still wounds that need tending, darkness that lingers in the shadows. The sacred flame, it may have vanquished Zarek, but it's up to us to keep the light burning." Leah nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving the fire. Sarah was right, as always. The flame inside her was a gift, but it was also a responsibility. She had been chosen for a reason, and that reason didn't end with Zarek's defeat. Derek grunted. "And what about Kale?" His voice was rough, laced with pain. He didn't look up, but his question hung heavy in the air. Leah's chest tightened at the mention of Kale's name. She didn't have an answer. How could she? Kale had sacrificed himself for them, for the world. But his absence left a void that none of them knew how to fill. "We honor him by continuing," Sarah said, her voice steady but soft. "Kale wouldn't want us to stop now. He believed in this cause. He believed in Leah." Leah blinked back the tears that threatened to spill over. She had to believe that, too. Kale had given his life so they could win. She couldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. "He gave us a chance," Leah said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "We have to make sure it wasn't for nothing." The group fell silent once more, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. But there was an unspoken agreement in the air. Despite their losses, despite the pain, they would keep going. They had to. Days turned into weeks as they journeyed across the land, helping where they could. The destruction caused by the dark flames was vast, but the people were resilient. With the threat gone, villages began to rebuild, and crops were planted once more. Leah and her companions offered aid where they could, lending their skills to those in need. But all the while, the sacred flame burned quietly inside Leah, a constant reminder of the path ahead. As they traveled, whispers of a new danger reached their ears. In the distant mountains to the north, there were reports of strange occurrences, creatures that didn't belong, shadows that moved of their own accord. At first, Leah dismissed them as rumors, the kind that often spread in the aftermath of great battles. But the more they heard, the more she began to wonder. The night they camped at the edge of the northern wilderness, Leah couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. The sacred flame inside her flickered, restless, as if it sensed something on the horizon. Sarah sat down beside her, her presence comforting in its familiarity. "You feel it, don't you?" Leah nodded slowly. "There's something out there, Sarah. Something we haven't seen yet." Sarah didn't respond right away, her gaze following Leah's into the fire. "The flame inside you is connected to more than just the dark fire we fought. It's part of the world, part of the balance between light and dark. I think this is just the beginning." Leah's stomach tightened. She had feared as much. The prophecy may have been fulfilled, but the world was far from at peace. There was more to come. She could feel it, burning deep within her. What do we do? Leah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah smiled gently. We keep going, Leah. We've faced the darkness once before. We can do it again. Leah nodded, though the weight of what lay ahead felt heavier than ever. She would keep going. She had no choice. The sacred flame burned within her, and as long as it did, she would fight for the world.